Tonight, we're happy to have Tom Rogers and Shelley Douglass of Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. They will present on the history and mission of Ground Zero, the story of the Peace Pagoda, and the current state of nuclear weapons in the United States and the world.
Well, I'm very glad to be back with so many Kitsap people. It's been a long time. It's been 2 years since we were able to come and visit, so this is a bit of a visit. And to tell the story of Ground Zero, we really have to do a kind of prehistory, and I will try and keep this brief because I really am history. It's Tom who's the current story. But the Trident campaign, the campaign that we began against Trident long before we had Ground Zero, was actually begun by the man who designed the reentry vehicle for the Trident missile system. His name is Bob Aldridge, and he lives still in Santa Clara, California. He's in his 90s now. He was a weapons designer for Lockheed. And this was just after the Vietnam War had petered out. And his kids, he was a good Catholic. He had 10 kids. The youngest was 4, and the oldest was in college. And the one in college had been out protesting the Vietnam War. And she would come home and say, Dad, you know, when this war is over, I'm afraid we're going to be out protesting your job, which raised questions for Bob. And he began to think about what he was designing, the characteristics he was designing into this reentry vehicle. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but he decided that really this kind of characteristic was only helpful if the weapon was going to be used on a silo with a weapon still in it, which made it a first strike system. And that horrified him. And he went with his family on a retreat at one Christmas into the mountains, and they all thought about this, and they decided as a family that he should quit his job, that Janet would start teaching again, and they would downscale their lifestyle, you know, hugely, so that they could live on her teacher's salary. And that's what they did. He quit his job. They changed their lives. And in doing that, they created a whole movement. Bob came to visit us. Jim and I were living in the mountains in British Columbia at that point, and he came and told us this amazing conversion story. And we were, of course, touched and moved that a whole family would make that kind of conscientious decision. And when we were at the most, the height of being moved, Bob said, and do you know where the Trident will be home ported? And no, we'd never heard of the Trident. He said, right below the border with British Columbia. And it was kind of as though he had handed that to us, kind of said, okay, I've done my part, your turn now. So Bob remained a researcher. He still researches on peace and nonviolence and nuclear weapons, but he kind of handed it to activists who were living in the Northwest and said, okay, you know, this is in your area. This is your baby now. And so some of us got together, an international community across the border between the US and Canada, and we formed a community called Pacific Life Community. That was in 1976. And we began to come down. We did various kinds of things in our own cities. We lobbied the British Columbia legislature and the mayor of Vancouver and the governor of Washington, all of those people who made statements against Trident. And we would come, a little ragtag group of us would come to the base, which was then under construction. It was just little barbed wire fencing around this base. We would come and do small demonstrations and be arrested and go to jail. And we saw that as making a conscientious statement, trying to raise the issues in the courts of the legality of nuclear weapons. And over time, this movement became more popular, so more people were joining the demonstrations. And we became aware that although our movement had been really sparked by somebody within the weapons community, the people in Kitsap saw us as enemies primarily, because we were outsiders coming in and condemning the way they made their living. And we thought, well, we're committed to nonviolence. That isn't a nonviolent way to be. So we decided we needed to be neighbors. And that was why 7 of us got together and formed what we called the Ground Zero Collective and looked for land in Kitsap and bought 3.8 acres, which shared 300 feet of fence with the Trident base. And we had a little funky house that came with the property, and we began to hold meetings and to leaflet workers going into the base because we wanted to communicate with the people who were working on the Trident system. So we did that for a number of years. Being Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, we went and showed our slideshow about nuclear weapons in people's homes around Kitsap County. We hosted weekly meetings every Wednesday for clarification of thought. And we leafleted every Thursday morning at the gates where people went into Bangor. And we did, on Thanksgiving, we handed out bread. Sometimes we handed out jokes, but we also handed out very good factual information about the nuclear arms race and the Trident in particular, and then about nonviolent methods of conflict resolution. So that was an important way of reaching out to the people in the base. And we had to go to jail quite a lot of times because the authorities didn't like the fact that we were trying to communicate, and they would arrest us. If we were on the base side of the line, the property line, they would arrest us. They'd have feds arrest us. And if we were on the county side, they would call the county sheriffs. And it took several years of court cases and going to prison before we finally won the right to be able to hand out leaflets to people going into the base. So from the beginning, we've always had an emphasis on trying to understand that it's all of our problem. It's not that the military are terrible people. It's that we are all caught up in this system, and it's going to take all of us to get out of it. So we've had a number of people who have left the base and people like Tom, who are now active at Ground Zero, who were on submarines. I think Tom was on the submarine that brought the first Trident around, if I'm not mistaken. So we were doing this. We were just a little ragtag group of people. We did have large demonstrations that would get into the thousands, but we, Ground Zero, were very small and just tiny. And in 1980, when the presidential election was happening, we got a call from New York from a monk friend of ours, a Buddhist monk who had been with us for a couple of years chanting for peace. He had gone to New York and he called us and said, Guruji and 30 monks and nuns are coming to Ground Zero this weekend, get ready. And we were, what? We really didn't understand at all Nippon Sanmyo Hoji. We really didn't know much about Fuji Guruji, who was the leader. But we learned very quickly. The night that Ronald Reagan won the election, we had a prayer service at Ground Zero with Nichidatsu Fuji and all kinds of various Christian denominations. We had Quakers, I think we had a few Baptists, we had some Lutherans, we had Catholics. And we all got together and prayed for peace. And Guruji was very moved by the witness of Ground Zero because at that point we were going in and out of jail quite a lot. And people were serving 6 months at a time for walking onto the base with signs calling for peace and things like that. So he said, the first Peace Pagoda in the United States should be built here because of the close proximity of the commitment to nonviolence and the nuclear weapons. And so we began this process long time ago, early 80s, to build the Peace Pagoda, which is a site for prayer for peace, a site to try and concentrate the energy for peace. And we had, well, it's a long, complicated story. We had quite a struggle around the pagoda. And finally, then we decided it was not helpful to continue to struggle. So we laid that down. And it's only recently that people have picked it up and permission has been granted. And now the pagoda is actually being built, a smaller version of the one we had hoped for. But in the meantime, the first trident arrived and the white train came to light. The white train used to run from Amarillo, Texas to the trident base, and it carried the nuclear warheads. And it was a secret kind of thing. People didn't know what it was. We knew because a reporter called us one day and said, there's this really weird train and we think it's coming to Bangor. And do you know anything about it? And we didn't, but we lived in the old station master's house over the tracks that served the trident base at Bangor. So we started looking and then we saw it. At the time, it was a completely white train. It had guard cars that went with it. It was very strange looking. And we realized, after some research that these were nuclear weapons that were on trains going across the country, stopping in major cities. So we began a pre-computer process of organizing along the train tracks, which involved many graphs and little lists of phone numbers and things being crossed out and timetables. It was all very complicated. But we began a community called the Agape community, the love community, that tracked these trains whenever they left Amarillo. There was a woman who moved to Amarillo to watch the trains, and she would call ahead down the tracks, and people would watch the train all the way to Bangor. And there were a lot of demonstrations along the way, vigils and all kinds of actions to say that people didn't want these things in their cities, in their front yards. So that was one arm of the campaign that was going on. And then the first trident, the Ohio, was expected. And we were organizing what we called the Peace Blockade, which was a flotilla of little boats. I mean, literally, most of them were rowboats. There were, I think, 2 sailboats, a catamaran and a sailboat. And they were planning to go out into the middle of the Hood Canal and block the trident. It was kind of like an aquatic sit-in. And we had all kinds of sort of makeshift things going on. And we also had a very large rally. I think the biggest we ever had, 9,000 people on the banks of the Hood Canal who came to protest a further escalation of the arms race. So of course, when the trident actually came, the Coast Guard preempted any attempt to stop it by these little rowboats, and people were picked up and arrested. And, the trident definitely did not stop. But the issue was raised, which was the whole point. And the religious community especially became very aware of what was going on and that the destruction that these weapons could cause, which is what we were trying to raise. That issue of, can we really say we're defending ourselves when we could destroy the world? So Ground Zero, at that time, was still a funky little house. It burned later, and now there's a very nice house there. But I think the commitment is still the same, to reach out hands across lines, to make friends and solve common problems together, not making enemies of each other, but working in conjunction with each other to begin to have a better world. And I think that's probably enough for me. I'm sure I could go on for hours, but are there questions or?
Yes, yes, we're going to take the questions for Shelley first. So if anybody wants a question for Shelley right now, you could put it in the chat. And if you want to wait, there'll be another chance at the end of Tom's talk also. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Tom. And would you take it from here, Tom?
Okay, I'm here. Thank you very much, Jill. And gosh, thank you, Shelley. When people don't have any questions, it just means that you did such a great job that there were no more questions. So that always works. I'm really honored to be here today for you folks, my neighbors, to spend some time hearing about what we do at Ground Zero, and my colleagues at Ground Zero are equally honored that KRL and Enlighten has seen fit to give us a platform. So with that, I would like to do a share screen and start a little bit of a PowerPoint, and I will try not to bore you. Voila. I'm still, okay, well, here I am. So first, just to introduce myself, I've been a resident of Kitsap County, Paulsbo, for the last 30 years or so. But in 1980, that young guy on the left was me on an attack submarine. And we got this strange tasking to go south from San Diego and rendezvous with the USS Ohio, who had just come through the Panama Canal and was en route to Bangor. And we escorted Ohio all the way up the coast. And we alternated between searching for possible Russian submarines that may have been trying to intercept and record the Ohio, and also to doing exercises with Ohio. And so at the same time that Shelley and her ragtag group of activists was demonstrating in the Hood Canal, I had just dropped Ohio off for her final few miles into Bangor. I served, most of my life, my entire adult life in the submarine force. And I was an unlikely guy to do that. I joined the Navy to dodge the draft, and then they just kept offering me opportunities that I couldn't refuse. So after command, which I finished my command tour in 1991, which you'll remember is when the Cold War ended, I was in a position where I was aware very much of what was going on in the Pacific. I was at the Pacific headquarters in Pearl Harbor for the years after the end of the Cold War. And I kept asking or looking and saying, okay, where's the peace dividend? And now that we are the world's superpower, why aren't we disarming nuclear weapons? And the answer was never very satisfying. And I recognized that national security policy was being controlled by the arms merchants and had nothing to do with security. It had everything to do with spending money on ships and weapons, and nuclear weapons in particular. They were still building Tridents, and they damn well were not going to stop. And I wasn't going to make admiral, so I was pretty comfortable speaking out and saying how dissatisfied I was. And after 32 years, I retired and moved on with my life. It took a few years for me to get back to the Pacific Northwest. I retired in San Diego. After I arrived in Paulsbo, I heard about the earliest Tridents being upgraded from the Trident 1 system to the Trident 2 D5 at a cost of billions of dollars. And I said, this is wrong, absolutely wrong. And I found my way to Ground Zero to try to do something about it. So that's how I got here, and I've been here ever since. 18 years since 2003. Doesn't seem possible. I would like to recite the Ground Zero mission statement just because I think words are important. And what I'm trying to do right now is get this column of people out of the way, but I can't figure out how to do that. So I can't see all the words, but I think it's important. I think words are important, and bear with me. I'm going to read the words. Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action offers the opportunity to explore the meaning and practice of nonviolence from a perspective of deep spiritual reflection, providing a means for witnessing to and resisting all nuclear weapons, especially Trident. We seek to go to the root of violence and injustice in our world and experience the transforming power of love through nonviolent direct action. I didn't keep track of how many times I said nonviolent, but that is what's so beautiful about Ground Zero is that we are a nonviolent community. Shelley talked about the funky little house, and the funky little house did indeed burn down of natural causes in 2005, and we did a lot of discernment about what we were going to do. We had a little insurance money and lots of benefactors, and decided to build this house and finished it in 2010. Thousands of hours of volunteer labor. The only people we paid were the licensed people that we had to. And this is the Ground Zero Center on Clear Creek Road in Paulsbo. I also put our webpage down there. It's a really, really informative webpage and tells you what we're doing, when we're doing it, and all that good stuff. What does Ground Zero do? The big things that you see us doing is nonviolent direct actions. We do 2 a year. I'll talk about those a little more later. We also continue the leafleting that Shelley and Jim pioneered outside the base. We do bannering, newspaper ads, billboards, bus ads. We put speakers out. And we also collaborate a lot with allied organizations. International Campaign, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, or for the abolition of nuclear weapons. They won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. We also work with Washington Against Nuclear Weapons and Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and several others, the Pacific Life Community and FOR. I can go on. First, nonviolent direct actions. We schedule these. Right now, we're doing 2 scheduled direct actions a year. Sometimes we'll do more. This most recent one was in August, and our keynote and our theme, each of our direct actions is themed, was for the Marshallese Women's Association. Rachel Hoffman from the Marshallese Women's Association was our keynote speaker, and she brought a contingent of 25 Marshallese from the Everett area. This is their banner, and Kijeto means persistence or something like that. So we always have, again, some kind of theme. We'll spend a day or so listening to speakers and then talking together and deciding what we're going to do as part of our direct action. And we do an opening circle, and the last thing we do before we go to the base is a pledge of nonviolence. And that's a very serious thing that everyone takes seriously. And if you're not into nonviolence, then maybe you ought to go somewhere else. We walk down to Bangor. It's a march. It's about a half mile on Clear Creek Road, and end up at the main gate of Bangor. Usually, sometimes we go to the trigger gate as well, but we chant and sing and demonstrate, and it generally culminates with a symbolic closure of the base, and we'll block the road with banners. Traffic will back up all the way to Silverdale. And in the background, you can see the Navy security. They don't do anything outside their federal property, which just in the lower left, you can see a blue line behind Mac Johnson with the green jacket on. That blue line is the demarcation between federal property and county property. And as long as we stay on county property, the feds don't mess with us. And so we do whatever we want until the state patrol gets tired of putting up with us. Typically, we can stop traffic for 10 or 15 minutes. And when we do this, this was done the last time we did it at 7 in the morning. So it's right at the morning rush of the first shift going in. There's a lot of annoyed people that are waiting, and we get to transmit our message. State Patrol comes in. The State Patrol, we have a very good relationship with both State Patrol and the sheriff, and also with base security. They treat us with respect and courtesy, just the way we treat them. And it's a neighborly relationship. And they clear us off the road after a while. And then for the people who didn't leave the road when they were told to, the State Patrol will issue citations. The normal charge is pedestrian in the roadway, which carries a fine. And that's the last part of the direct action is people who are cited go to court, and normally we'll ask for a mitigation. And in those mitigation hearings, each of us gets to stand in front of the judge and explain why we are demonstrating against nuclear weapons. And the judges, again, in Kitsap County have been historically very courteous and fair. And the fines typically are mitigated down to $25, sometimes less, sometimes they're even dismissed. It kind of all depends on how the judge feels that day, but it gives us an opportunity in a public forum to speak truth to power. The other thing we do is leafleting. We try to do that monthly, but we're kind of on a leafleting hiatus right now because of COVID. People are not willing to roll down their windows for strangers to give them a piece of paper. And so we've not leafleted for several months. And we'll probably start it up again once the Delta variant gets under control. We are doing a lot of bannering. This is I-5, an I-5 overpass in Seattle. We also are actively bannering in along Highway 3 at Sedgwick and Loxie Egan's, and there's some bannering going on in Tacoma as well. We're doing a lot of bannering this month because this is the month of the International Day of Peace and the International Day for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons on September 26th. You may be a subscriber to the Kitsap Sun. This is an ad we put in the Sun on August 15th. After we put in a couple of ads commemorating the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is an appeal to Navy personnel to refuse orders to use nuclear weapons. Orders to refuse nuclear weapons are by definition illegal orders. And we try to make that point that military personnel are obligated not to follow illegal orders. So the Sun has been very good about allowing us to put content into the paper that might be controversial. We also have right now 4 billboards up in Seattle area. These billboards are about the International Day to eliminate nuclear weapons, and it shows Trident submarine with Seattle in the background and a graphic showing that all of the weapons are 20 miles from downtown Seattle. And finally, Seattle Metro bus ads. We did those for 3 years. And starting a couple of years ago, the Metro enacted regulations that said that nonprofits couldn't buy ads on the buses. And they have refused our money ever since, although there are other nonprofits that are getting ads on the buses. So we're working to try and continue the bus ads. The bus ads were a really good vehicle for people to see our message. And once in a while, we have a wedding at Ground Zero, and that's me and my bride, Chrissy, 5 years ago. On the front steps of Ground Zero getting married. Oh, I can't hear the reaction from all the people. So that's in a nutshell what Ground Zero does. I was asked to talk about the history of the Peace Pagoda, and Shelley started it off with Guruji's visit to Ground Zero in 1980. Guruji was the founder of the Nipponzan Myoshi order of Buddhism, and he built pagodas throughout Asia and came to the US in 1980. He was 95 years old when he visited Ground Zero. So I've got a busy slide here, which I hate, but I did manage to encapsulate a 7-page history of the pagoda into 1 page. Early in the 1982 timeframe, Shelley talked about this. Ground Zero was the enemy in Kitsap County, and the folks then tried to get a pagoda permitted, and the permit was denied due to incompatibility with the neighborhood. And in that same year, there was an arson fire that was set by two Marine brothers from the base, and it destroyed a geodesic dome that contained religious artifacts, a Buddha and a crucifix that were going to go into the pagoda. And Shelley was there then. And the perps were never prosecuted. I'm told that the Navy knew who they were and transferred them. And back in '82, I guess that was not an unusual thing to happen. But we continued to try to get a building permit for a pagoda, and 4 years in and out of courts resulted in a final rejection in 1985. A couple of years later, we were able to erect a smaller monument, the Gentai Hoto. It's a stupa that is there today and contains the remnants of the artifacts. I'll show you a picture of that next. And then in 2003, Reverend Senji Kanaida arrived. And Senji is a Buddhist monk who lives at the temple in Bainbridge Island. And he revived the dream of the pagoda. And things were starting to move in the right direction. And then in 2005, the little house at GZ was destroyed, and things on the site just kind of wound down for a while till we figured out how to recover from that. And then we recovered. We built the house that you saw earlier, and slowly started to think more about the pagoda project again. 2015, a design was improved, but Kitsap County Community Development had some other ideas that Ground Zero was doing things that shouldn't be done in a residential neighborhood, and raised very, very serious issues regarding conditional use permits that would have made it impossible for Ground Zero to carry out its mission in the way that we had for 40 years. They were demonstrated to be wrong. One of our members, Glenn Milner, worked tirelessly to work the system with document requests and stuff like that from the county to show how their regulations were not being applied properly. And then in 2018, we finally got a meeting. It was Glenn and I, and we went down to Port Orchard, all ready to fight a contentious meeting. And we sat down in this big conference room, and there was donuts on the table, and the head of the community development stuck his head in the door, said hi, left, and then the assistant said, we're withdrawing our requirement for a conditional use permit, and we would love to help you build the Peace Pagoda. And Glenn and I were floored. It was a wonderful day. And a few months later, the permit was issued, construction began, and we are in the process of construction as we speak. And I'll show you a few pictures of where we are right now. This is the Gentai Hoto, built in 1987. That's Senji, who is doing some maintenance around there. And this monument called the stupa does contain remnants of the Buddha and the crucifix that were destroyed in the fire. Here's volunteers erecting rebar for the walls of the pagoda. And this is a picture I took this morning of where we are right now. We're 12 feet off the ground. The pagoda is going to be about 30 feet in diameter and about 30 feet high. And you saw the sketch a few slides ago. That was Senji drew that sketch. So we're very excited about the progress that's being made on the pagoda. And it's just the culmination of 40 years of persistence. On the left side of the picture, you can see the fence. And that is the fence that we share with the Bangor submarine base. It's actually their fence. It's not our fence. We don't have a fence. So anyway, I thought I would just take a few minutes and jump over the fence with you, just because Bangor has been essentially closed ever since the early 2000s, right after 9/11, 2001. The security posture at Bangor changed radically, and the places that people used to be able to drive to are no longer accessible. And even for people who have base access, you can see the little red spot in the lower left is where ground zero is. And to the left of that, all of those white buildings, that's the kind of public part of the base that people with base access can visit. It's housing and the PX and the gym and all that sort of stuff. Some school buildings. But the vast majority of the base is not accessible to anybody unless they have a need to be there. So let's go visit. Google Earth's a wonderful thing. We'll just visit on Google Earth. This is the Delta Pier. It sits out on the Hood Canal, and it's where the Tridents go when they are being maintained and refit between their patrols. You can see there's 3 Tridents alongside the pier there. Along the bottom leg of the Delta is a dry dock. So they've got an intermediate maintenance facility there that essentially can do everything that they need to do to keep the Tridents running. Just north of there, we're looking west, by the way. At the top of the screen is the Hood Canal, which is west of Bangor. The next arrow is at the explosive handling wharfs. There are 2 of them. The first one, number 1, is on the right. It was built 40 years ago. And the second one is new. It was just built within the last 5 years at a cost of $1 billion. Ground Zero sued to prevent that from being built. The Navy violated the National Environmental Protection Act by not disclosing a lot of dangers that were inherent in building this structure that's going to be handling nuclear weapons, and more importantly than the nuclear weapons, handling the missiles that are full of high explosive. And you can imagine if a missile was going to cook off during missile handling operations, what that would do to surrounding missiles. And if there was more than one submarine, it could result in just a catastrophic accident that would spray nuclear warheads all over the place. And finally, if you go back and look at the explosive handling wharf, there's a road that leaves the EHF and comes back to the east and then goes to the south into the Trident base and, or excuse me, into the area in the center, and that's the SWIFT Pact, Strategic Weapons Facility Pacific. So any nuclear weapons, warheads, or missiles that come off the ships go to SWIFT Pact, and any of those that are going to leave the base leave from SWIFT Pact. And here's an up close at SWIFT Pact. It's a secure area, guarded all the time with both electronics and real people. And it's again a shoot to kill area for security. The bunkers that are on the upper right are where the missile motors go when they're being stored. And the ones on the lower right used to be where the warheads were stored, but recently, where the arrow is pointing, there's an underground bunker that was built, again, at a cost of $1 billion to house the warheads all in one spot. And it looks like something out of Star Wars. The transporter comes up from the waterfront and goes into that right-hand tunnel through some blast doors, goes down several stories, and offloads the warheads, and then they're stored underneath all of that concrete. And at some point along the way, I remember reading about the hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete, but I can't give you an accurate number, but it's supposed to be a hardened bunker. And then the transporter comes back out the other side. So so that's kind of the state of what's going on at Bangor right now. And here's a graph or a table that shows the current state of nuclear weapons in the world. You can see that the US and Russia own over 90% of the warheads that are in existence, and then smaller numbers, China, UK, France, smaller again, India and Pakistan, and then finally Israel and North Korea. The number of deployed warheads that the US and Russia has is controlled by the New START agreement, but the total number of warheads is not. So the big number on the right, it includes some warheads that are held in reserve but can't be activated very quickly, and also warheads that are obsolete and waiting to be dismantled. The key to disarmament, I believe, is these three treaties. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty's been around for 50 years, but it's the backbone of arms control. New START, of course, is a bilateral between the US and Russia. And then the new treaty, the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, is pretty cool. And I'll talk about all three of those. The thing about the Non-Proliferation Treaty is it includes an article that requires the nuclear armed states to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. We are a party to that treaty, along with the other four original nuclear weapon states, Russia, China, the UK, and France. And Ramsey Clark, who just passed away, talked about that treaty. He was one of the people who wrote it, and he said, if we had just done what we said we were going to do in 1969, we wouldn't have any nuclear weapons today. But there's still a way. 191 nations are party to the treaty. India, Pakistan, and Israel, who are nuclear weapon states, never entered, nor did, actually North Korea did enter, but then withdrew in 2003 to pursue its nuclear aspirations. New START is a good treaty. It limits the number of deployed warheads, and provides for verification between the US and Russia, but it shows that you can do verification. I think that, if, again, going back to the NPT, verification is what it's all about when it comes to disarmament. Trust but verify. I think Reagan said that. The New START, since the Biden administration came in, they extended it for 5 years up until 2026. Finally, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which ICANN got the Nobel Peace Prize for in 2017, is a United Nations treaty. It's in force since it was ratified by 50 nations. It really does a couple of things. First of all, it lays out the framework of a weapons ban that is very similar to the weapons ban that exists for chemical and biological weapons, landmines, and cluster bombs. They are weapon systems that are known to be indiscriminate and inhumane. On the other side, it doesn't have a lot of teeth to make the nuclear weapon states disarm, but it does show the world that most of the world doesn't want nuclear weapons. Regrettably, it has not been signed by most of NATO or South Korea, Japan, or Australia, and that's because of pressure by both the US, the UK, and France to prevent them from ratifying the treaty because they are essentially under US protection and collective protection agreements. I got a vision. My vision is that leadership will come. And when the right leaders come to the US and Russia and China at the same time, then nuclear disarmament can happen. And the three great powers will be able to coerce the other nuclear weapon states to disarm along with them. Unilateral disarmament will never happen, I'm afraid. So it, again, takes leadership, statesmanship for the right people to come together in order to finally get rid of these evil, horrible weapons. And Bangor will become a technological center of clean technology and energy. It will be a place for all of the really smart people that are working at the bases today, all the really smart people that are working in the weapons industry today can go and do something that's really meaningful and beautiful. And finally, I think that the Ground Zero Center will become the Ground Zero Peace Park. So
Thank you
Thank you.
very much, Tom Rogers and Shelley Douglass. Tom, some of these questions are toward you, and I'll start with that. And people who want to ask Shelley something can continue to put them in the chat box.
Okay.
These are really good questions. First of all, that was a lovely presentation. One of the first questions was, what do you think about the US-Australian nuclear submarine pact that was announced just recently?
I think it's important not to conflate nuclear submarines and nuclear weapons. Australia is a non-nuclear weapons state and has renounced nuclear weapons, has no nuclear weapons, and has no plans to have any nuclear weapons. I've worked extensively with the Australian Navy in the 90s, and they're great sailors. They got a great Navy, and they got crappy old ships that they got from the Brits back in the 50s. And I was thinking about that today. The last time I was on an Australian submarine, it was this dirty old diesel submarine with these giant big electronics cabinets. And they were doing all this sophisticated stuff. And I said, well, where is all the electronics? And the guy opened up the big electronics cabinets, and there was a laptop inside. You know, they've come a long way. Diesel submarines are coastal. They don't have a lot of range. And for a country like Australia, first world country, a staunch ally, having a nuclear submarine makes sense. India is also building nuclear submarines.
I think that when I said this question, I got confused by using nuclear energy for the submarine versus having a submarine with a nuclear weapon on it. I think that was a little bit confusing. I'm glad.
It is confusing, and a lot of people conflate that, and that's just wrong. Right. Today, the U.S. Navy has 55 attack submarines, and none of them carry nuclear weapons.
Right.
The only nuclear weapons that are being carried by the U.S. Navy are on the Tritons.
Right. Thank you for that too. One question that's interesting, especially here in Bremerton, is what actions can be taken against, if the Navy personnel says, I'm not going to do anything with nuclear warheads, what action can be taken against that Navy person? You know, deleterious actions can be taken by the Navy against that person.
You're talking about power. The UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is clear that naval personnel, all military personnel, are obligated not to carry out illegal orders. And I have no doubt, because of what's gone on over the last few years with the end of the Trump administration and the craziness there, that there's been a lot of seminars on a lot of Trident submarines about what's a legal order and what's not a legal order, and what your responsibilities are and what they aren't. I think that for a sailor to refuse to carry out orders because he or she believes them to be illegal would subject them to prosecution for dereliction of duty or insubordination or treason. It will take a lot of courage for a person to do that. Yet, these are the real patriots, the people that stand up for what's right.
Just make a comment for that. So you're really asking them for a lot when you hand out those posters.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually we, I only showed you the top half of the ad. The bottom half of the ad says words like, we know this is hard and we know it will take great courage and we'll do what we can to help you.
I don't know if I can say this right, but kijijeto, which means perseverance, that you mentioned that word at the beginning of your slides. But the Marshall Islanders, who are the people who the nuclear bombs were tested all that time, all those people in the Marshall Islands, they've had to persevere for a long time. But what about them? Do you want to make a comment about what they have had to endure with nuclear weapons being tested in their area?
What a horrible, horrible, horrible injustice to those people. They were removed from their homeland, forcibly removed from their homelands. They did nothing. 67 nuclear tests, atmospheric nuclear tests were done. The islands were ruined. And this was in the 50s. In the 60s, they were sent back and they died. They died of cancers. They died of birth defects. They were sent back to this contaminated series archipelago that was their homeland, and it was stolen from them. And even though many of them were allowed to emigrate to the US, they're still not being treated fairly. They do not enjoy a lot of the privileges of citizenship or healthcare or any of that stuff. It's a travesty, and it's just a very, very, very sad part of our recent history. What we did to the Marshallese Islanders was awful.
It's awful. Another question was, how much can we have about 5,000 of these warheads, something like that you said, but how much of these can each of the warheads blow up? Like, in other words, one blow would land on Seattle. How much would it destroy? One warhead.
Yeah, one warhead. Now the warheads come in two different sizes, 100 kilotons and nearly 500 kilotons. But 100 kiloton warhead is 8 times as much as the Hiroshima bomb. And it would level a city like Seattle out several square miles. It's a public health nightmare. The people who aren't killed outright are going to be burned, or they're going to suffer from radiation poisoning. And we do not have the hospitals to take care of those people. And besides, the hospitals are going to get destroyed anyway. It's unthinkable.
You know, that really.
But and the other piece is you will never see a single warhead being detonated. All of the not all, many of the missiles that both the Russians have and we have are MIRV. They have multiple warheads in one missile. That doesn't mean that the 5 warheads can go to 5 different cities. They go into a footprint that is maybe 60 miles around or 60 miles in diameter. So those 5 weapons are all going to detonate in the area between Seattle, Kitsap, and Tacoma. And it's just going to be a big hole. And millions would die.
So, and what was that? Do I remember that slide right? You said about 5,800, something around that number. Is that what you said we have?
That is the number of warheads that the US has. 1,500 are deployed warheads. So, you know, in a giant exchange, 1,500 warheads would get launched, and that's enough to kill millions today. And in the next few years, put the initial attack would put enough soot into the atmosphere to cause a nuclear winter that would ruin agriculture for the parts of the world that are most on the edge. And if you look at the wind and all that stuff, there's been many studies, billions of people in the third world would die of a famine. It's unthinkable.
That's the whole number, and it wouldn't be just 1,500 because there'd be 1,500 coming back from the other side, presumably, whatever. So, it really makes it, the only idea is that we keep building them to make other people rich because they're building them. So I think that was your point. I didn't understand it at the beginning when you said it, but that makes
That's what it's about. And the only way to assure that a weapon system will not be used is to destroy it. I believe that in my heart of hearts.
Two more questions came in. One about people around here are very glad you're challenging the Navy's hegemony. I never could say
Hegemony, that's a good word. Yeah.
But because they think they're the big shots around here and that you can't challenge them. And even though you're just a few people outside the base, you're at least doing a small thing to power, which is very good. The next one was, what is the timeline that you saw? You know, you said wait until good people are elected or become leaders, and enough good leaders are throughout the world. Do you see any timeline for that? And part of that question was, what can we, so we're not in your group yet. And one, you might ask people to come to your group also at ground zero. But two, if people, what are the actions that regular people can do to hasten down that line so that we do have peace?
I think using the ballot box and challenging our elected representatives, Kilmer and other congressmen in our area, as well as Cantwell and Murray, write letters and say what you're doing is inadequate. You must stop this, or else we'll elect somebody who will. And it does take a groundswell. I mean, Ground Zero is a grassroots organization. We're local. We don't have a lot of money. We got enough money to do some stuff. There are other organizations that are bigger that do a lot of lobbying in Washington and support those organizations. But most importantly, vote with your conscience and elect people that are the right people, the leaders. There are leaders, and then there are politicians who have sold their souls to the arms industry, or you name it, big pharma, or all of the things that are. Oh, don't get me started on election finance reform. It's so hard for really good people to be elected because they've got to sell their souls to get there, and it saddens me. But it's our country, it's our system, and if we could elect Barack Obama, we could elect somebody else with leadership, who manages to get through the opposition by sheer excellence. And who is that person? Who is that person? Where will he or she come from? And when that happens, that's when it's going to happen. And gosh, I'm 75. I'd love to see the end of nuclear weapons, and all of us would. All of us probably in this room.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You both, to Shelley and to Tom, you made a really powerful presentation. And I think there's no more questions coming in now. So thank you again from all of us.
Thank you.